Yes po.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so this week we will be talking about Renaissance architecture. But before we do that, I'd like us to have a recap on what we've learned last week. So, can anyone start? What is Gothic architecture? Yes, Irvin. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon rin po, ma'am. So, when we say Gothic architecture, it's progressive heightening and lighting of the buildings, especially po yung mga cathedrals.
Mm-hmm.
So the unique features of Gothic architecture is that the orientation of the facade face west,
Mm-hmm.
the Latin cross plan. That's it, ma'am. Kasi masasagot ko na po yung number to pag pinagpatuloy ko pa po.
Okay, let's give the chat. Let's give the floor to April Sinadhan. He raised his hand a while ago. April, good afternoon.
Good afternoon po, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Ma'am, Gothic architecture po, also known as style ogival po, is all
Mm-hmm.
about height and light. Actually po, during this period, there is a progressive heightening and lightening of buildings. The main motivation po ng mga tao dito is maabot po yung langit, and nagawa naman po nila yon through the use of flying buttresses and spires. The application po of flying buttresses was started during this era po. By definition po, flying buttresses is a structural component, typically an arc that extend out from a tall stone, which allowed po na magkaroon ng bigger windows po yung mga churches. Another point po is the decoration and mural po during this era would normally depict stories from the Bible po. The use
Mm-hmm.
of stained glass po was evident, and the elements po that was introduced during the Gothic era po were spires, pointed arches, ribbed vaults, and rose windows. And when it comes naman po sa orientation po ng mga structure, the facade po of Gothic churches faced west, same as the Byzantine architecture and Romanesque architecture po. Overall po, Gothic architecture has many contributions when it comes to structural forms or details in the field of architecture. And these details po are crucial in planning, designing, and building a new structure po intended for worship purposes po.
Thank you, April. So someone else was raising his hand a while ago. Can we see whose hand was that? Basically, Gothic architecture is it's one of the longest running era, one of the longest standing period of our architectural development. Gothic architecture was focused mainly on reaching the heavens. I remember telling a story on the Wednesday class about the Tower of Babel being somewhat of relevance kasi people wanted to reach the heavens already. They think probably that they could reach the heavens kasi they could equal, I don't know, they could equal the divine. Pero here in Gothic architecture, why we're studying it is primarily because of their contributions, as Irvin and April has said. They developed certain structural innovations that help them achieve what they want to achieve in terms of their structural identity. Pag tinignan mo yung isang simbahan or isang cathedral is, by the way, the principal building type during the Gothic era, not the basilica. Uh, they they wanted it to look like pag tinignan mo siya, you know already it's built in the Gothic era or in the Gothic style. Kasi when you look at Gothic architecture, you'd probably be seeing the following identifying characteristics such as maraming pointed arches, maraming patusok yung building in short, and medyo mas rigid siya, and what they wanted to do is pagpasok mo sa loob, you'll feel the light or you'll be more it wasn't as solemn as your Romanesque building, but this is part of the development na mas maliwanag sa loob, mas maaliwalas siya. So number third question is, what is its importance and impact to the practice of architecture for you? Why do you think it's important, Irvin?
Ma'am, before I answer that question po, I like to add po sa mga nasabi na po kanina. Yung sa Gothic architecture po, they incorporate the humanoid or animal or what we call that, human structures or figures po. Human figures in the structure po. Katulad po siya nung HOA1 po namin, yung mga caryatids po ba yun? Ayan.
Sorry, ano?
Ma'am, yung sa Gothic architecture po, they incorporate the humanoid or human or
Yes, they did.
animal figures in the structures like gargoyles po.
That was actually the bonus question that I did not get to ask you last week because you came to my class unprepared.
Yes, ma'am.
That was our bonus question supposedly, and 7 other students was able to answer it last week, and I did not mention it all throughout the presentation. So the gargoyles, they have a practical purpose, not just for aesthetic, but they have a practical purpose. They serve as the weep hole. They serve as a channel for where water from the parapet walls should flow through. So para siyang scupper drain. It catches the water and throws it outside. And sa mouth nung gargoyle siya usually lumalabas. And on top of that, the people we're studying, the people that we're talking about, sorry, Janella, I have to mute you. The people that we're talking about, since the beginning of this discussion, or actually the whole HOA2 discussion, these people are very symbolic. We had to study the motivations of the early Christians. We had to study the motivations and the reasons of your Romanesque and Gothic era and your Byzantine era. So it's not a question of bakit ang dami nilang superficial na pinaniniwalaan. But the thing is, on top of its aesthetic and structural purpose or its practical purpose, the gargoyles were a symbol of protection. They were a symbol of protection, security, bantay ba? Bantay ng structure. That's one. If you actually watch the Great Hunchback of Notre Dame, you'll see the gargoyles in their cathedral, in the Notre Dame Cathedral, diba? So that's one example in which we can easily relate to. So apologies for last week since we were not able to discuss it very well, but it's actually one of the most fulfilling portions of the history of architecture. Itong midterm portion natin is actually the most fulfilling or the better part for kasi when we talk about the latter era or the latter periods, they're more or less the same or very similar in nature, except that they happened on different timelines. But this one, starting from your church architecture to Romanesque, Gothic, and now Renaissance, and then soon Baroque and Rococo, you'll actually see the difference in terms of building and structure. You'll see a very significant difference, and you'll be able to tell them apart. So moving on, let's move on. Here are our discussion points. Introduction to Renaissance architecture, early, high, and late phase. Similarly with your Gothic, this is a rather long era. And since at this point in time, when is our Renaissance one? In this point in time, marami ng historians. So we have more records, and then more people that are more concerned with, this is the time of Queen Elizabeth I. So I wasn't able to mention this during the Wednesday class, but then, she fostered a great era for literature, for culture, for cultural development. Pero this started in Italy. Don't get me wrong. Elizabethan and Renaissance are different eras. So more on architectural character, important buildings with its innovations and invention, and the prominent architects during this era. Okay, let me just get my pointer. You'll have to take note that starting from this era, we will be talking about prominent architects. We never mentioned the word architects when we discussed the previous architectural eras or development, and now we're mentioning them. Because during this time, we had what we call, this is the age of enlightenment, basically. So, a lot of people, a lot of individuals, a lot of talented individuals were able to push architecture as a theory and as a practice. So let's move on. Any questions so far? Any questions so far? None? Okay. So here are our guide questions. By the end of this discussion, I want you to be able to know what is meant by the word Renaissance. Why did we have a transition period in history called Renaissance and what brought it about? And what is the main contribution of this era to the practice of architecture? These are the questions we hope to answer at the end of this discussion. So, your Renaissance architecture, it started in Italy. Somewhere here in the map is Italy. And Renaissance came from the word or the Latin word renascita, which literally translates to rebirth, revival, rediscovery. So rebirth, your Renaissance happened between the 1420s and to the 1550s. So rebirth, it's a period of artistic, cultural, economical, and political rebirth. What do we mean by this, diba? They were, they were going through the dark ages. Kaya nandyan yung dark ages sa slides natin. It's often branded as a time of war, ignorance, famine, and pandemic. The bubonic plague. The we had troubles. So it was a very dark time for the European continent at that time. And during the Renaissance, they actually had to undergo this what we call a revival of the classical orders. So this is where we rediscovered or the rediscovery of philosophy, literature, and art kasi we were going through a tough time. Pabubo ng pabubo yung mga tao. Remember in the Roman Basilica, the basilica in the Roman sense was a civic building and scholars met there regularly to discuss ideas. 'Di ba? So, yun yung binabalik nila dito. So, at this point in time, they were going through a lot of revivals, rebirth, and rediscovery. So, moving on. During the Renaissance architecture, the personality of the architect has increased in importance. Na-embody ng building yung architect mismo. They had different styles. They had different approaches to how a building should be constructed. Later on, you'll know kung bakit importante yung mga architects in terms of constructing a building, architects and engineers as well. So in the Renaissance period, the use of classical orders, the arches, and the symmetrical proportions were also evident. Binabalik nga nila eh. So it's a revival of the classical orders. The desire for symmetry, proportion, and harmony. Bakit? Kasi they wanted order. At the time when everything is in chaos, they wanted at least order in their built structures. Psychologically, it had an effect. Kasi this era was able to usher in an enlightened citizenry, an enlightened people. When you look at a building, it doesn't bring you much chaos. It doesn't bring you headache. It doesn't bring you a lot to think about. But it is what it is. It's rather plain than complicated. It poised dignity. It champions to have or give dignity to the building. So the silhouettes are simple, clean, and with flat roofs. Walls are made up of dressed masonry blocks. See, that gave the buildings a sense of dignity. I was ahead of the slide, and they gave more importance to the horizontality of the building. Going back to your Gothic architecture, I trust that you have watched the Wednesday class recording. They wanted more vertical structures. They wanted to reach the highest possible heights that they can use, or that they can reach rather. They wanted to reach the highest possible heights. So dito naman, during the Renaissance era, they just wanted it to be stable. They just wanted it to look secured. It when it looks stable, it's not as high, but it looks very sturdy. It looks very strong. It has a sense of dignity. Moving forward, any questions so far? None? So ornaments were based on mythological subjects. We know this already. During the classical era, your Greco-Roman era or your Greek and Roman era, you had this. And they're just bringing it back now. And now they have developed a certain art called graffito. It's not as important as other historians say it is. Pero graffito is actually yung parang meron kang painted surface and then you overlap it with something else, like a layer of black paint or white paint, and then you scratch it to reveal the colors underneath. You can imagine naman, di ba? I really hope for your sake that you can. Uh, it's a scratched and colored plaster. So that's a new development in the design and the construction of the buildings. So moving forward, any questions so far? None? Okay. So here are your basic characteristics of your Renaissance architecture or Renaissance structure. They have clear, easily comprehended and understood buildings. What do I mean by this? Later on, you'll know. Babalik-balikan natin to. I'm just giving you the basics now. Pero we'll still go back to this. They put so much effort into achieving symmetry, geometry, and proportion. Remember, horizontality, the regularity of parts. This is what I meant when I said na they did not want chaos whenever they're looking at the building because it's already chaotic around them. Classical orders were reused. This is the third time we mentioned that. Mathematically precise ratio of height and width. The golden ratio, the golden rectangle. I'm sorry, Wednesday Classify, forgot to tell this to you. But in this era, dito natin na-develop yung mga ganong klaseng mathematical proportions. You'll actually have more of that in your theory, but I'd rather not discuss it now. You have flat or coffering ceilings or coffered ceilings now. Doors usually have lintels or arches or pediments. This is a decorative aspect. Your windows have transom decorations too. What's a transom? The one above your window. It's usually semicircular, like your French Gothic window, but a different style, of course. More Greco-Roman than Gothic. Buildings were designed with architectural theories already in mind. Bakit? Dito sa era na to, nagkaroon tayo ng mga literature or books or printed materials about the practice of architecture. Later on, we'll know that the Dere Edificatoria, the 4 books on architecture, the 5 orders of architecture, and the people responsible for it. Okay, moving on. Any questions so far? The buildings at the back of the silhouette of the slide is an example of your Renaissance architecture. You see, they use the columns, the orders, the arches, the keystone, and this is what I meant when the windows had transom decorations too. This one. So it's not plain, they had transom decorations. You have 3 phases, your early, your high, and your late Renaissance. So let's go to the early Renaissance. Early Renaissance, it occurred in Italy, as I've mentioned. This is the start of the adaptation of the classical detail and ornamentation. Take note, it's not just the ornamentation, also the detail, also the process. Okay, so let's go, move on. The structure on the right is the Florence Cathedral or the Santa Maria del Fiore Church in Florence in Italy. If you will Google this, this is actually a Gothic building designed by Arnulfo di Cambio. But somewhere along the way, nahinto yung construction niya. They couldn't achieve the dome that they wanted. So later on, they seek the help of this person, Filippo Brunelleschi. He's an Italian engineer and architect, a designer. And he worked only on the dome of the Florence Cathedral. He had other works, but bakit very important itong dome ng Florence Cathedral? This kick-started the era of Renaissance architecture. There is nothing Renaissance about the cathedral. It's Gothic. But the dome is a very special feature of the building. Why? they couldn't construct the dome. Pero itong si Brunelleschi, he had another idea. Okay, he made the dome with an inner and outer dome. The outer dome, of course, is what we see now. The inner dome, I wasn't able to take photos when I was doing the slide. So, the inner dome is a self-supporting dome with concentric rings made out of masonry. Concentric, I mean same center. The brickwork pattern was herringbone, so nag-overlap sila in such a way na hindi sila malalaglag. And they had embedded chain supports. Why is this important? Why is this important? He used classical ratio, classical mathematical computations to establish the dome. Any questions so far? Questions, answers, comments? This is the dome of the Florence Cathedral. This is the Florence Cathedral. On the outside, very Gothic, as you can see, the pointed arches, rose windows, the tower. But an important factor of your Renaissance era is the dome, this one, of the Florence Cathedral. You see the murals on the dome? Okay, let's move on. This is the plan of your Florence Cathedral. Still follows the Latin cross plan because, again, it's a Gothic cathedral with an addition of a Renaissance dome. Another notable structure by Brunelleschi is the Riccardi Palace. The Riccardi Palace is named after the family and the owners of the building, Medici Riccardi. This is called the Palazzo Medici Riccardi. Okay, this is designed by Brunelleschi and his apprentice Michelozzo. Nakakalimutan ng madaming tao or ng madaming historians, maraming architects as well, na kinikredit nila ito kay Brunelleschi when, well, in fact, it was more Michelozzo than Brunelleschi. So, let's take a look at the building. You have your arches, you have your masonry construction, you have your corbel support, and you have your Greco-Roman elements of order, repetition, and it's more regular than irregular. It's not actually irregular at all. This is the interior courtyard, the inner courtyard of the Riccardi Palace. Oh my God, why am I saying Bacardi? It's a Saturday. Anyway, Bacardi is a type of liquor, guys. It did not come from me. So, yeah, any questions so far? Questions, comments, violent reactions? None? I hope the second group is ready, or the first group rather is ready. So this is the plan of your Riccardi Palace. As I've shown you already, you have your arcade windows, you have your architrave. This entirely is the architrave. It's a window resting on a horizontal molding with a pediment, small pediment. The molding or the sill is resting on corbels, may or may not rest on corbels, but the identifying factor is it's a window with a small pediment and a horizontal sill. And then your classical orders. It frames your openings or windows or doors, any opening at all. Okay, going back, look, your architrave, your arcade, and your architrave. Yeah, you still have your arches here. This is a true arch, by the way. You have your corbelled arches. I've shown you that. Now this is your true arch. Questions, comments, suggestions before we move on? None? None, all right. Let's move on. Another important person during the Renaissance period is this guy, your guy, Battista. Leon Battista Alberti. He designed Santa Maria Novella. He helped promote architecture from an artisan's trade to a profession. Remember, when I told you earlier that in this era, we are starting to label these people as architects already, although without the formal education. Leon Battista Alberti also wrote the De Re Edificatoria. I'm sorry for the typo. De Re Edificatoria. It's one of the earliest architectural theory books that was made available to the public. Maybe more than what was recorded, but this is the first recorded one, or the earliest, one of the earliest. Santa Maria Novella is one of the first churches where consuls, this one, were placed in the facade over the side aisles to connect them with the nave. You still have your nave, you still have your aisles, and now you have your console. Now you see your classical orders, your pediment, your columns with the capital orders, round arches. Also, I think this is a frieze. Your triglyph and your, what's the other term? Can you remember, guys? Yung combo sa frieze, it's called a triglyph and something else. Let me just, triglyph and the metope. Okay, so it's all starting to come back now. Santa Maria Novella inside. This is by, again, your guy, Batista. The plan, it's not anymore in the cross plan. It doesn't follow anything actually. But this is of your early Renaissance. Another structure by Leon Battista Alberti, Sant'Andrea in Mantua. It's a modern Renaissance church that consists of a single nave with transepts. The interior is ornamented with a single order on pedestal supporting a barrel vault. Let's take a look. This one. This is your coffered ceiling. This is Sant'Andrea Mantua. You have your classical orders, column, and a single barrel vault inside. Okay. This is the plan for Sant'Andrea Mantua. Any questions so far before we move on to your high Renaissance? High Renaissance, let's move on. Someone wants to say something in the chat. Good afternoon po, ma'am. Okay lang, Claire. Don't worry about it. High Renaissance. This is a shortest period among all your Renaissance phases. Actually, I think around 20 years only, or almost 30, but somewhere along the way. But you know, your Renaissance period is divided not just because of architecture, but also because of your art. They had different art styles during this era, and not so much difference when it comes to architecture. I'd rather redivide it into early and late. But with respect to the earlier historians that were ahead of us, let's discuss the High Renaissance period. One example of your High Renaissance structure is this very interesting building designed by Donato Bramante. This is the Tempietto di San Pietro, or the small temple or the little temple of Saint Peter. It's a shrine dedicated to his martyrdom. It's considered as one of the first high Renaissance building in Rome. And now let's talk about the building. Look at the building. It's not planned in a crossway. In fact, it's planned in a circular way. Why is that? Any guess? Any guess as to why Bramante decided that, I'll design this building with a circular plan? Anyone? No guesses at all? No guess at all? April?
Ma'am, ano po siguro parang divine, ano po, perfection, ganun po.
That is actually the reason why. Bramante believed that the circle, or yung shape of a circle, if it represents the perfection of God, or what we call the divine perfection. Divine perfection. Okay? So, he designed it into a circle. Looking at the plan, this is one of the most classical buildings, as classical as it could get. You have a circular dome, a circular plan, you have your Doric orders, you have your frieze, you have your triglyph and your metope, you have your masonry construction. It's made out of masonry. Someone wants to say something in the chat. Ma'am, para po kakaiba, sabi ni Rodney. Rodney, is this about the circular plan? Is this about the question for the circular plan? If yes, then actually yes, they wanted to be different, but they also wanted to bring back parang ang tingin nila was the Greco-Roman era before was their golden age. And they wanted to bring it back. And this is the age actually of enlightenment. So people were they're asking, yes, thank you, Rodney. They're asking or they're more of the reason now. Nandun na sila sa age of reason. Papunta na sila doon. Not yet there, but almost. So this is considered as one of the first high Renaissance building in Rome. This is the plan of your Tempietto di San Pietro. Okay, moving on. Any questions so far to your late Renaissance? This is the pinnacle of classical simplicity and harmony. Remember, simple, harmonious. Those are the keywords you want to remember when it comes to your Renaissance era. Let's see. Andrea Palladio. This is this guy, Andrea Palladio. He'll play a part more later on when we talk about the reactions or the movements against or for the Renaissance period. He wrote the 4 books of architecture and he designed this house and made it into a classical temple. This structure is called Villa Rotonda. What's interesting about this is when you look at it on one side, it will look exactly like this the other 3 sides. For example, this one, the front one, this is how it will look like when you view it from here, and from the back. This is the plan. Kung ano meron dito, yun din meron dito, yun din meron dito, yun din meron dito. Let's look at the building. This one, the pediment, the frieze, the columns, naka-forward siya here. Your structure here, your humanoid figure. your I forgot what it's called. I'm sorry. But I'll get back to you on that. This one is this one. And then the protrusions here are also the protrusions here. Please don't call them humanoid figures. We have a term for that. I just forgot, and I'll share to you later once I find my notes. It's sadly not with me now. So another structure of your late Renaissance is from Giacomo Barozzi da Vignola. This is the Jesuit church. It resembles the Santa Maria Novella a little bit because of the consoles. So the Jesuit church is the Jesuit mother church. This guy da Vignola also wrote the 5 orders of architecture. You see now they're writing more and more books. So again, let's discuss. You have your architraves, you have your pediment, you have your sculptures, you have your Greco-Roman orders, you have your columns with the Corinthian capital. I suppose this is a Corinthian capital. I cannot. Yeah. And you have pediments or decors above the door and the windows. Very Greco-Roman, very classical. Hello po, ma'am. Who's this? Sure, go ahead. No problem. This is the interior of the Jesuit church by Da Vignola. This is the plan of the Jesuit church. And now, can you refresh my memory? Who among you know about the 4 Ninja Turtles? I hope you're not too young to know who the Ninja Turtles are. Does anyone know the name of the 4 Ninja Turtles? Guys, Ninja Turtles. Yes, Janela.
Si Michelangelo, si Donatello, tapos sino yung dalawa?
Nakalimutan niya. Someone was saying something. Cedric was saying something. Cedric.
Nakalimutan ko na.
Nakalimutan mo din. Someone was also raising her hand a while ago. Someone else was raising a hand. Okay. Your 4 Ninja Turtles. Irvin.
Si ano po, Rafael, Donatello, Michelangelo.
All right. Sige, Irvin, I'll mute you on that. So I'll answer my question again. So the 4 Ninja Turtles are Leonardo, as in Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, as in Michelangelo, sorry. Michelangelo in the Ninja Turtles, but his name is pronounced as Michelangelo Buonarroti. Leonardo as in Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael as in Raphael Sancho. He has a very long name. And the other one is Donatello. These are four important Renaissance guys. They are painters, sculptors, designers, architects, or different trades of arts. Why am I relating them? Wala, mas madaling tandaan if you know the Ninja Turtles. So, one of the structures that Michelangelo Buonarroti designed was the Farnese Palace. This is the epitome of all that's Renaissance. You have your repetition, you have your order, you have your architraves, you have your arches and pediments above window, you have your true arch, you have your columns, your orders, and your corbels. See, this one are corbels. You have your support there, and you have a flat roof. So Michelangelo was a Florentine sculptor and painter of the roof of the Sistine Chapel in Vatican. Can you tell me what is the name of this famous painting of Michelangelo? For the Sistine Chapel. He painted a lot inside the Sistine Chapel. He painted the wall, the south wall. He painted a lot of walls in the Sistine Chapel, but he also painted the ceiling, not the roof, but the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Vatican. What is this famous painting by Michelangelo? Can anyone recall?
Sistine Chapel po.
Yes, Cedric?
Sistine Chapel po ba yun?
Yes.
Tama.
Yes, the painting in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. What is it called? All right, since nobody can answer me, I'll just answer my question again. The painting at the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel is called The Creation of Adam. This is the painting wherein God reaches to his creation and therefore their fingers touch slightly. So if you know that. Also, he finished the Farnese Palace. After he finished the Farnese Palace, he carried out to do the Dome of St. Peter. St. Peter is a very important Renaissance structure, and that the next group will be discussing it. This is the Farnese Palace, very regular, very symmetrical. What do I mean by symmetrical? Pag hinati ko siya vertically, the symmetry pala nila is vertical, ha? Pag ginati ko siya sa gitna, what you see on this side will also be the one you see on this side. Okay, is that clear? This is the plan of your Farnese Palace. And that ends my discussion. I have my discussion on St. Peter, but I'd rather give the discussion to our assigned group. I did finish my lecture in 1 hour, which is my allotted time for it. So I've allotted 1 more hour for the 12, was it 12 architects for the St. Peter, group 1? Group 1?
Yes po, ma'am.
Yes, Austin, they're 12. So I'll now give you permission to share your screen. So we now have to listen to the first group as they prepare or as they share their presentation. All right. Make sure you furnish the class a copy of your presentation, huh? Janella, Princess Austin, you have the floor now.
So, good afternoon. Ma'am, can you hear me po?
Yes, sir. Very audible.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. We are the first group to share the information and details we have learned about the St. Peter's Basilica through our research. This presentation gives an overall idea of concept, planning, and designing, and various ornamental features of St. Peter's Basilica. Next slide. So as you can see, our topic divided into 3 parts, which are history of St. Peter's Basilica, architecture and design of St. Peter's Basilica, lastly, trivia and facts. Next slide. So, St. Peter's Basilica is a Renaissance-style church in Vatican City. The basilica was built according to tradition above the burial site of St. Peter, one of the 12 disciples of Jesus, and the first bishop of Rome. To maintain this tradition, popes are now buried within the basilica. Regarded, regarded as one of the holiest sites in Christendom, it was built to replace the old St. Peter's Basilica between 1506 and 1626. It was designed by the greatest old masters of the time, including Donato Bramante, Michelangelo, Carlo Maderno, and Gian Lorenzo Bernini. The basilica is cruciform in shape with an elongated nave in the Latin cross. The central space, as you can see on the center, is dominated both externally and internally by one of the largest domes in the world. So next slide. So who built St. Peter's Basilica? In 4th century, Emperor Constantine made the choice to build the basilica where St. Peter was buried. If you remember, Emperor Constantine was the first emperor who converted into Christianity. He's also the one who spread Christianity. The construction undertaking was completed in the year 329. Gradually, the church began to disintegrate. The structure was demolished and a new basilica was erected in its place under the order of Pope Julius II. He began construction on the new church in 1506. Next slide. History of St. Peter's Basilica. Next. So, as you can see, this is the timeline of St. Peter's Basilica. 64 CE or Common Era, this was the year that St. Peter was crucified and buried at Vatican Hill. Next, 326 to 333, Old St. Peter's Basilica was built on the site of St. Peter's tomb under the reign of Emperor Constantine. 333 to 1505, during the Middle Ages, Old St. Peter's Basilica flourished and became the most important pilgrimage site in the Western world. Next slide. 1505, the old church was demolished under the orders of Pope Julius II. He decided to build a new church in the palace of the old one. 1506, construction of the new St. Peter's Basilica began. Lastly, 1626, the new church was officially established at the heart of Vatican City. Next slide. So, Circus of Nero, 64 Common Era, in the 4th century. I'm so sorry. So Circus of Nero, 64 CE or Common Era, where St. Peter's now stands, once a chariot racing stadium. Bago siya naging basilica, chariot racing stadium muna siya. So built in the time of the Emperor Caligula, Claudius, Nero during 4th
Did Irvin freeze or ako yung nawala ng internet?
Something wrong po with the connection of John Irvin.
Alright. Sige, let's wait for him to be back.
in Rome under the rule of Nero, and he was given the death penalty. He requested to be crucified on an upside down cross. Yung pabaliktad, yung imagine si Jesus Christ nakapako, pag binaliktad mo, ganun yung itsura niya. Because the saint had denied his Lord, it is said that he did not believe he was deserving of dying like Jesus. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Death of Saint Peter, 64 CE. So Rome saw a devastating fire in the year 64 CE that largely destroyed the city. According to several historians, the fire was started intentionally. Si Nero daw yung may pakana kung bakit nagkasunog sa Rome. However, Nero blamed the fire on the Christian sector. He thought that they had started the fire because they refused to worship the Roman deities. Alam niyo naman kung ano yung Roman deities, inaral to nung HOA1. So this sparked a terrible wave of persecution against defenseless Christians. For the entertainment of the crowd, Nero carried out this execution at the circus. Saint Peter was giving sermons in Rome at this time, and Emperor Nero had him crucified as a result. Where Saint Peter's Square now, there was formerly the circus of Nero. In short, bago magka St. Peter's Square, ito ay Circus of Nero. Next slide.
Good afternoon, good afternoon, everyone. So, Trophy of Gaius in 150 Common Era. So, this site is the Peter's Tomb because a famous area visited by many pilgrims over the year. So, ito yung naging famous area na binivisit ng mga pilgrims ng year na yon. Tapos to mark the spot of the Apostles' Tomb, members of the church decided to build a prominent structure about it. The structure was known as the Trophy of Gaius nga. Yun yung pinaka-name nila. The name Gaius refers for a Christian scholar from Rome who allegedly argued that Rome was the center of Christianity. He believed that there was something special about Rome that made it Holy Land. Yun yung paniniwala niya. Kaya ang naging yung Rome, parang naging Holy Land siya. The Trophy of Gaius was large enough to allow for a plan to stand on top of it. Many sermons were held inside the necropolis using the Gaius as a platform. So next slide po. So, yung bagong basilica ngayon is not the original. So, there's a old St. Peter's Basilica. It is the original basilica of the St. Peter's in Rome. Ang pinaka-plan niya is a 5-aisled basilica plan cathedral with the apse transept at the west end. It was built in the orders of Roman Emperor Constantine between 326 and 333 and completed around 30 years. Historically, records claim that the structure was constructed on the place where the structure was where Peter was buried between 64 and 67 Common Era. So yun yung time lapse na yun yung kung kailan naka-buried siya. Thus, Old St. Peter's Basilica hosted papal coronation and other religious ceremonies. It was that the Charlemagne was crowned as the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire there in 800. This was in the era when the Old St. Peter Basilica was at the top of his religious significance. So next slide po. Next slide po. So dahil nga nag-collapse yung old building, ngayon na-rebuild nila yung basilica in 1505 AD. Like many medieval churches, eventually fell into despair. Nearly 1,200 years after its completion, the old basilica was in horrible state after the serving of one of the most prominent churches. One of the building's side wall was said to be tilting about 6 feet off the wall, indicating that it was on the edge of collapsing. Many popes attempted to restore the parts of the basilica during the next few years to preserve the priceless edifice. But all their attempts failed. So, tinry nilang i-restore yun, pero hindi siya na-restore talaga. But all of their attempts failed nga. So finally, Pope Julius II, who reigned from 1503 to 1513, decided to demolish the structure and replace it with the new basilica. So yun yung time, yung 1503, nag-decide na yung Pope Julius II na i-demolish na lang yung structure and replace it with the new basilica. So next slide po. So yun na nga, yung April 18, 1506, so dahil nga nag-decide na si Pope Julius II na ipa-demolish na lang, so his successor has vision to build a splendid new basilica. So nag-build na lang sila ng basilica na yun nga yung bago ngayon. That is the same place as the previous one, which was named St. Peter Basilica. So St. Peter Basilica, designed by Michelangelo, Bernini, and other notable Renaissance architects, is by far the most spectacular piece of Renaissance architecture. It is one of the world's largest churches, as well as the most important in all the Christendom. Under the command of Pope Paul V, construction of the basilica began in 1506 and lasted until 1615. The basilica has a lot of history within its walls, in addition to its beauty to architecture. Next na po. So the year of construction, so bago siya matapos na 120 years to complete the construction of the new Saint Basilica. So napakatagal niya, so 120 years. So the original design of the basilica was crafted by renowned architect Donato Bramante. So yung mga gawa niya is yung pang-Renaissance. So inspired by the Roman Pantheon, Bramante is incorporated all the tradition aspect of a church. After his death, Giuliano da Salvo, Fra Giocondo, and Rafael continued to work on the construction of the basilica. So sila na yung nagtuloy dahil nga namatay si Donato Bramante.
Janela?
Yes po, ma'am.
Sorry, I just have to correct. The name is Giuliano da Sangalo, Fra Giocondo, and Rafael.
Yes po.
Sige.
Ay, sorry po, mali po pala pronunciation. Okay po, thank you po, ma'am. So sila po yung nag-continue ng work na construction ng basilica. In 1547, Michelangelo came on board and enhanced the original design, creating the magnificent structure that exists today. He was responsible for many aspects of church, including the iconic dome in 1602. Carlo Maderno was appointed by the Pope and added the nave and facade of the basilica. Finally, Gian Lorenzo Bernini completed the final addition to the basilica, including the baldacchino and chair of St. Peter. Bernini was also responsible for designing St. Peter Square outside the basilica.
Who designed St. Peter's Basilica? For a massive structure like St. Peter's Basilica that took over a century to build, the Vatican hired the best architects in Rome.
April, can you turn on your camera? Yeah, thank you so much.
During its construction, 12 different architects worked on St. Peter's and changed its design po. The first architect was Donato Bramante. During his time po, Bramante was dubbed as ruinante because he demolished po many old structures in the process of reshaping the Vatican. And kasama na nga po dito yung Basilica of Constantine na pinagtayuan ng St. Peter's Basilica. He proposed po a centrally planned church in the shape of a Greek cross enclosed within a square with an enormous dome over the center and smaller and half domes radiating out. Next slide po. The second architect was Giuliano da Sangalo. After Bramante's death, the work went to Giuliano da Sangalo and Fra Giocondo. Sangalo strengthened and extended the peristyle of Bramante into a series of arcs and order opening around the base. The base of the Western Choir and the beginning of the South Ambulatory was built in his time. And next po na architect is Fra Giocondo. Hindi po siya, yung nasama lang po namin na architects is 6, pero po itatry ko din pong i-singit yung hindi po namin nasama po sa slides. So next architect po is Fra Giocondo. In 1513, Pope Leo X appointed Fra Giocondo as architect of the new church of St. Peter in Rome.
April,
He was
sorry.
April,
sorry. Can I interrupt you for a while? You're talking about Fra Giocondo and you're flashing Rafael Sancho.
Ma'am, 6 architects lang po yung na-include namin po sa slides po.
Oh, can you tell me why?
Nakalimutan namin yung ma'am na hindi po nagkaintindihan sa
Sige. While you're reporting
Kaya po
that,
hindi po na-include yung
while you're reporting that, can one of your group mates edit your slides already? So the following can show to your classmates the individual architects while we're discussing Fra Giocondo and Rafael Sancho para ma-include yung mga ibang wala. Or can you not edit while you're sharing your screen? Or no, hindi, no? Or someone can share the screen and another group mate can edit? So your classmates can see sino ba si Donato Bramante, sino si Giuliano da Sangalo, sino si Fra Giocondo. Because I think they deserve their own place since every one of them work, no matter how small, for the Basilica. Nawala na sila. What do you think? Can you flash, April? Or can you send to me so I can flash the screen while the others can edit?
Ma'am, regarding to that po, pinag-uusapan namin kung sino po yung mag-a-add po ng mga architects na hindi po nasama. Kasi ma'am, hindi ko na po siya ma-edit because naka-data po ako.
I see. Sige. Ganito na lang. Can you continue your report now? And then before sending the slides to the class, can you edit prior to sending to the class?
Yes, ma'am, I can do that po.
Sige. Please resume your screen. Sorry for interrupting you, April. Do you need time to compose your report, April? Or do you want to continue now?
Ma'am, okay lang po ba kung i-edit po muna namin yung presentation po namin?
Can you still do that?
Oh.
I'll give you 15 minutes so everyone can go on break.
Yes po, ma'am. Itatry po namin po.
All right, sige, let's go on break for 15 minutes so we can resume by 5:30. We might consume until 6 p.m., but it's fine. So we come back here at 5:30. All right. Ayan, go ahead.
Hello po, ma'am. Good afternoon po.
Yes, go on, April.
I just want to say lang po, sorry po sa interruption po for our presentation. Pwede na po ulit mag-start, ma'am.
Go ahead, sir.
Thank
Good
you po.
luck.
The first architect was Donato Bramante. Donato Bramante created the initial plan for the new church. He proposed a centrally planned church in the shape of a Greek cross enclosed within a square with an enormous dome over the center and smaller and half domes radiating out. Next slide po. The second architect was Giuliano da Sangallo. After Bramante's death, the work went to Giuliano da Sangallo and Fra Giocondo. He strengthened and extended the very style of Bramante into a series of art and ordered opening around the base. The base of the western choir and the beginning of the south ambulatory was built in his time. Next slide po. The third architect is Fra Giocondo. In 1513, Pope Leo III appointed Fra Giocondo as an architect of the new church of St. Peter in Rome. He was evidently needed for his expertise on statics, as the foundation piers of the structure were shifting and has begun to deteriorate. Next slide po. Next is Raffaello Sanzio de Urbini. After the deaths of Giuliano de Sangallo and Fra Giocondo in 1550, Raphael took over and added his own modification to the design. His plan was for a basilica in the form of a Roman cross with a short corona and a facade. He died at the age of 37 and much of his work there was altered and demolished. Next slide po. Next is Baldassare Peruzzi. Pagkatapos po ng kamatayan ni Raphael, noong 1520 po, Peruzzi was appointed as one of the architects for St. Peter's in Rome. Basically po, he maintained the changes that Raphael proposed to the internal arrangement of the three. Peruzzi maintained the changes that Raphael proposed to the internal arrangement of the three main apses, but otherwise reverted back to the Greek cross plan and other feature of Bramante. Next slide po. Next is Antonio da Sangallo. Siya naman po yung pamangkin ni ang nauna po kaninang architect, which is si Giuliano da Sangallo. Ang main practical contribution po niya ay yung pag-integrate or pag-strengthen po ng Bramante's piers which had begun to deteriorate. Nag-work din po siya sa Vatican Apartments and siya din po yung nag-supervise po ng building the chapel, Pauline Chapel, the Sala Regia, and Scala Regia. Next is Michelangelo de Ludovico Buonarroti Simoni. Michelangelo, who first desisted, designed the dome and helped the structure as we see it today. He went back to Bramante's original plans, but changed it from a balanced and restful dome into a dynamic construction. Additionally, he contributed on Pieta, St. Peter's exterior and exterior of the church. Next slide po. Next is Giacomo della Porta. Della Porta gave a higher, more pointed profile than Michelangelo had intended to the dome of St. Peter's, which became the prototype of the Baroque dome. Nakapag-collaborate po siya kay Domenico Fontana to complete Michelangelo's dome between 1588 po to 1590. Next is Domenico Fontana. Si Fontana po ay kilala po sa pag-relocate ng obelisk. As what I have said earlier po, nakapag-collaborate po siya kay Giacomo della Porta para po sa completion ng St. Peter's Dome. In 1588 po, nanalo po siya sa competition para ma-move po yung Vatican obelisk at kinailangan po ito ng madaming workers as well as horses para po ma-relocate yung obelisk. Next po is Giacomo da Vignola. After the death po of Michelangelo in 1564, Vignola continued work at St. Peter's Basilica and built two smaller domes according po sa Michelangelo's plans. Giacomo di Vignola po. Next po is Carlo Maderno. Maderno was primarily known for his work on the nave and facade of the basilica after being appointed by the Pope in 1602. Yung major Roman commission niya po ay yung facade of Santa Susana na nag-led po sa kanya para po maging chief architect po ng St. Peter's. He pulled down po yung remaining parts of Old St. Peter's and transformed Michelangelo's centralized Greek cross design into a Latin cross with a longitudinal nave. And lastly po, the last architect po was Gian Lorenzo Bernini. In 1624 po, Bernini was appointed as the official architect of St. Peter's. He was commissioned po to build a symbolic structure over the tomb of St. Peter in St. Peter's Basilica, which is called Baldacchino, and the bronze chair completed in 1666 na ang tawag naman po ay St. Peter's Chair.
Do you guys remember what a baldacchino is?
Ma'am?
Do you remember what a baldacchino is or a baldacchino?
Yes.
Sige, ano siya?
I-explain po other groupmates po namin po.
I-explain nila yung baldacchino. Sige.
Yes po, ma'am.
Go.
Thank you po.
Thank you, April.
So, ito yung summary of the 12 architects. So, Donato Bramante, whose design won Julius II's competition. Antonio de Sangalo, a student of Bramante. Yung pinaka-contribution niya is yung the Pulling Chapel. Next is si Fra Giocondo, is strengthening of the foundation. Raphael and Fra Giocondo, whose redesign and building plan was not executed. Michelangelo, design of the dome, crossing, and exterior, excluding the nave and facade. Giacomo della Porta, design of the cupola. Yung cupola is yung dome. Carlo Maderno, extension of Michelangelo's plan, adding a nave and grand facade. Gian Lorenzo Bernini, addition of the piazza, the Cathedra Petri, and the Baldacchino. Next.
Good afternoon po, ma'am. So we're discussing the architecture and design of the St. Peter's Basilica po. St. Peter Basilica was built in Baroque style architecture. Next slide po. Architecture and design. St. Peter Basilica was built in Baroque style architecture. It follows the style of the Roman Pantheon, but Michelangelo modified the final design to include the supporting piers to hold the massive dome. The core plan of Bramante was to match the basilica to a Latin cross. So yung design po ng St. Peter Basilica po is Baroque architecture. So recall, ang Baroque style architecture po is originated po siya in Italy noong 17th century po. It has characterized by free sculptural use of classical orders and ornament. Sa Baroque kasi, ito yung maraming interpretation sa mga spaces and nilalagyan ng sculptures, paintings, at mga decorative arts.
John Landerson,
Nasabi
sorry.
din dito yung
Landerson, sorry.
Po.
I have to cut you. Don't talk too much about Baroque and Rococo. That's our topic for next week.
Okay po, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. No, but I appreciate how you were able to connect the St. Peter's already to the Baroque style. But it's actually a reaction or one of the reactions to the Renaissance movement. So, but it's our topic for next week. So please leave some for me to discuss. Thank you.
Okay po. So nabanggit po dito na may core plan po ang St. Peter's Basilica po. So ano nga ba ang the core plan of Bramante? The core plan of Bramante po is kapag sinearch nyo po yung plan po nito is meron po tayong tatlong plan. May nakita ko po dun sa slide po ni ma'am, meron po dun. And dalawa lang po yung na-search ko. Ito yung pa-square at yung pahaba po. Kasi po, kung mapapansin po natin dun po sa plan, pa-cross po yung plan nito. And yun po yung tinatawag nating Latin cross. Para po namamatch po siya sa Basilica to a Latin cross po. Sa interior po, the interior was opulent with marbles, Renaissance era, sculptures as well as artifacts. After Bernini built the baldacchino and St. Peter's chair to complete the structure. St. Peter's chair, the church has become a textbook symbol of the Renaissance. Sa interior po is nababalot po siya ng marble. Hindi po siya yung balot na balot po, pero magmukha lang po siyang opulent or mamahalin. Sa baldacchino po, nabanggit po dito, ang baldacchino po is ito po yung malaking structure na nasa loob ng simbahan or nasa gitna po nun, gawa po siya sa bronze. Yung St. Peter chair po, nabanggit din po dito. Ang St. Peter chair po is malaki siyang upuan or upuan po ni St. Peter na nakalukit din po sa gitna and also known as the throne of St. Peter. Yun po. Next slide po. St. Peter's Basilica exterior. The most important attraction of St. Peter's Basilica is its long forecourt, St. Peter's Square, inspired by Greek style. The exterior of the basilica is decorated with sculptures. On the facade, ornate Corinthian columns bearing the statue of Jesus Apostles are visible. There are two giant statues of St. Peter and St. Paul placed on the entrance as well. Nabanggit po dito yung forecourt, long forecourt. Ang long forecourt po, ito po yung space sa St. Peter's Square. Example po nito is yung gasolinahan po. Yun po yung forecourt, long forecourt. Then banggit po dito yung facade. I-spoil na rin, madidiscuss din po ito yung facade and ornate Corinthian columns. I-spoil ko lang po. Ang facade po, ito po yung harapan ng simbahan po, may ornate Corinthian columns. Nabanggit po dito ang ornate Corinthian columns. Ang ornate Corinthian columns po ay isang column na nasa taas na is may style ng dahon alike, na mahaba taas may pa-curl po. Next slide po. St. Peter's Basilica interior. As St. Peter's Basilica is one of the most beautiful examples of Renaissance architecture. It sure has a list of invaluable treasure inside in terms of design elements as well as artifacts. The list of works includes Michelangelo Pieta, Bernini's bronze baldacchino, and St. Peter's chair. A neoclassical sculpture of Pope Pius VI is also considered a masterpiece among other papal monuments. So recall po natin yung Renaissance. Ito po yung transition ng medieval to modern world. Sa architecture Roman nito is ginagamitan ng Italian Renaissance forms and motifs more or less in traditional buildings. Then syempre po sa loob ay may mga treasure and artifacts po na nasa loob. Example nga po nito is yung sinabi kong Bernini's bronze baldacchino and St. Peter's chair. Then meron pong bago dito, nabanggit po ang Pope Pius VI. Si Pope Pius VI po, siya po yung head of the church noong February 1775 hanggang sa mamatay noong 1799. Then siya po yung nag-rule ng Papal States po. Next slide po. So ito po yung facade. The facade of St. Peter's Basilica is 118.6 meters wide and 48 meters high. It is standing on its own without the support of the building because it was built independently by architect Carlo Modern 1607, but the entire structure was completed. So recall lang po din ulit natin yung si architect Carlo Moderno. Isa siyang Italian architect and pinanganak noong 1556. Tinagurian din po siya ng father of the Baroque architecture. Siya yung gumawa ng facade ng St. Peter Basilica at sa ibang pang-structure kagaya ng Santa Susana and Santa Andrea della Bella. Next slide po. Next slide po. Okay. Next slide. Next slide po. Dome. The dome of St. Peter's Basilica is quintessential part of the Vatican skyline. Italian master Michelangelo designed the dome, alternating the design of Bramante, who was the first architect of the basilica. The massive structure is support 4 piers. Each of the dome is 136.57 in total height and has an inner diameter 136 feet. I think yung dome po ng St. Peter is radial dome. Ang radial dome po is this was built with steel or timber trusses arranged in a radial manner by polygonal rings at various heights. Yun lang po. Next reporter po.
So, yun po. Addition lang po dun sa dome. Yung dome po ng St. Peter's Basilica is known as the tallest dome in the world. Na sumusukat po ng 136.57 meters in total height. So, next is atrium. Great Italian architect Carlo Moderno designed the atrium of St. Peter's Basilica. The atrium measures 71 meters in length, 12.89 meters in width, and 19 meters in height. The construction of the atrium was started on 1608 and finished in 1612. The portico of the atrium was designed with ancient medallions. So kapag po sinabi nating portico, it is the porch leading to the entrance of the building. So speaking of entrance, next slide po. Entrances. There are 5 entrances in the atrium. So these are the 5 bronze doors. The door of death, door of good and evil, Philaret's door, door of sacraments, and the holy door. Holy door is considered very sacred by the pilgrims. So kapag po sinasabi nating pilgrims, sila po yung mga tao na naglalakbay mula sa malalayo upang pumunta sa isang banal na pook or lugar. And the holy door only open once every 25 years. Next slides po. Altars. St. Peter's Basilica has 25 altars, but the most sacred was the papal altar, tulad po ng nasabi kanina. Kaya siya naging most sacred dahil it was built over the tomb of St. Peter. It is designed by master Italian artist Gian Lorenzo Bernini, described as the lead sculptor of his age. Bernini was entrusted with sculpting the St. Peter's altar by Pope Julius II. Next slide po. Thank you. So chapels. St. Peter's Basilica has 11 chapels on its nave. This includes the chapel surrounding the dome as well. So yung mga chapels na ito ay dinisenyo ng iba't ibang master artist that time. But the most famous chapel is the Chapel of Pietà, sculpted by Michelangelo again at the age of 24. The sculpture of Pietà shows Virgin Mary grieving while holding her arms to the dead body of Jesus Christ. Next slide po. Nave. Yeah. The St. Peter's nave is 90 meters long, 26 meters wide, and 44.5 meter high. It consists of 4 bays, which are divided by pairs of marble pilasters, 25 meters high. Between each pair of pilasters are 2 niches, which house statues of sainted founders of religious orders. Next slide po. So, sculptures. Tingin ko naman po, napapansin niyo naman po na kanina pa nababanggit yung sculptures. Kasi po, the interior of St. Peter's Basilica is a vast space filled with sculptures and 10,000 square meters of mosaics. Many of the finest artists are represented in works of art which includes Michelangelo's Pietà, Bernini's Baldacchino and Cathedra, and Arnolfo di Cambio's ancient statue of St. Peter. Thank you po.
Let's talk about tombs. The basilica is built of ancient cemetery, and its crypts have become the real places of popes for centuries, considered it to be the first Pope Saint Peter. There are 100 popes' tombs can be found in the Vatican that took about 120 years to complete. The construction or Saint Peter Basilica, this cathedral contained papal tombs and a necropolis under the structure inside the cathedral, most of them the Vatican tombs. The tomb designed by Gian Lorenzo Bernini, year 1620 to 1624. The tomb of Saint Peter burial at the altar of Clement Chapel, and which is considered sacred part of the church. Next slide po. Okay. Saint Peter's Square. The shape of piazza was purposefully designed to symbolize Saint Peter's Basilica, the mother church of the Christianity, an embracing welcome to the world the piazza was named in honor of Saint Peter's Square or Piazza San Pietro is probably one of the world's most famous squares and one of the most breathtaking designed. During 17th century, it houses over 300,000 people. What to see? The most impressive part of the square, besides its size 284 columns and 88 pilasters that flank the square in a colonnade of 4 rows. Above the columns, there are 140 statues of Saint created 1670 by the disciple of the Saint Peter's Square is providing a approach to the great church. Its huge elliptical Saint Peter's Square, designed by Gian Lorenzo and built between 1656 and 1667. There are two beautiful fountains in the piazza. The south left one by Carlo Paterno. It built in 1630, and northern right one by Berkeley. Next slide po. Michelangelo Piano. The message conveyed in Michelangelo's is one of the peace and hope by choosing to show Christ death as one of his quiet. Michelangelo is sending the message that death is not the end, that death does not mean heart-rending experience for us or people. The famous work of art is the body of Jesus on the lap of his mother Mary after the theme is of northern origin. It is an important work as it balances the
Here are some interesting facts about St. Peter's Basilica. Next. Did you know that there are 91 popes that are buried under the church? Under St. Peter's Basilica, about 99 popes are buried in the papal tomb. There are also tombs of many royalties and noblemen sharing the same burial ground. Popes including St. Leo, St. John Paul II, and St. Pius were buried here. Archaeologists consider these tombs as invaluable treasures because of their historical significance. The old St. Peter's Basilica stood tall for 1,200 years until Pope Julius II decided to raise down the first St. Peter's Basilica. The Grand Temple stayed in its place for 1,200 years straight. St. Peter's Basilica is the largest church in the world. Made as a symbol of pride, St. Peter's Basilica is grand by all measures. St. Peter's Basilica becomes the tallest dome in the world and cited as the largest Christian church in the world. It was named a World Heritage Site by UNESCO in 1984. Next. The paintings are actually mosaic. It has a total of 150 mosaics, and they are so detailed that they are usually mistaken as paintings. Bernini built 284 colonnades in St. Peter's Square. The defining characteristic of the piazza are the 284 colonnades, which frame the piazza. The piazza is surrounded by these colonnades, creating an elliptical shape that is 320 meter long and 240 meter wide. Lastly, the attempted assassination of John Paul II. On May 13, 1981, in St. Peter's Square in Vatican City, Pope John Paul II was shot and wounded while he was entering the square. The location of the shooting marked by a stone tablet in St.
Is my connection weak or naglag yung connection nung nagsasalita?
Next na po.
Summary po. St. Peter Basilica is a Renaissance-style church in Vatican City. The basilica was built according to the tradition above the burial site of St. Peter. So according po is, it's originally po talaga na it's a tomb for St. Peter of the 12 disciples of Jesus and the first bishop of Rome. To maintain the tradition, popes are now buried within the basilica. As Miss Nika po said na there's a 91 popes buried in the basilica. Regard of one of the holiest sites in the Christian dome, it was built to replace the old St. Peter Basilica between 1506 and 1626. As as a report kanina po, the old St. Peter Basilica was built on site in 326 to 333, and it became the most important pilgrimage on Western world in 333 to 1505 until it was demolished po or under the order po ni Pope Julius. And noong 1506 po, na-construct na po ito into a new basilica. And in 1626, the new church officially established na po. As today po, it was designed by the greatest old masters of the time, including Donato Bramante, Giuliano de Sagalo, Fra Guscondo, Raffaello Sancio de Urbino, Baldassare Ferruzzi, Antonio de Sangalo, Michelangelo di Lodinovico, Buonarrito, Simoni, Giacomo della Porta, Domenico Fontana, Giacomo da Vignola, Carlo Maderno, and Gia Lorenzo Bernini. Today, the church serves as a symbol of Renaissance architectures as well as integral sites of pilgrimage. It is a papal basilica and not a cathedral. Since it's not the seat of bishop, the Archbasilica of St. John Lateral is actually the Cathedral Church of Rome. And aside from that, ma'am, about po sa Michelangelo po, wait lang po, ma'am. Michelangelo Pieta po. The Pieta is one of the most recognizable statue po the world has created in Italian master Michelangelo. The Carrara marble structure despite Jesus after his crucifixion on the lap of Mother Mary. And that's all po for the presentation po.
Thank you so much for the effort and for your crisis management. However, I would like to note na Italiano tong mga taong to, ha. Be careful how you pronounce their names. Ha? Be careful how you pronounce their names. Michelangelo Buonarroti, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, Da Vignola. Just be careful how you pronounce their names kasi it's very important para magkaintindihan tayo kung sino yung mga pinag-uusapan natin. And especially, to pay respect din kasi they're of Italian descent, they're of Italian, what do you call this? Yun lang naman yung comment ko so far. But thank you so much for your presentation today. And I appreciate the crisis management. When you're working already on site or in the office, there are unforeseen circumstances that will eventually arise. And it's up to you as architects, as crisis managers, on how you will address them. And thankfully, you were able to address yours in more or less 20 minutes. So that's a good call already. So for next week, sorry for extending by 4 minutes. This is just very quick for a wrap around. So for next week, we'll do the recap next week. And for the next week's group, please message me now before I forget to give you your topics. All right. So thank you so much, guys, and have a happy weekend.